My name is Claire Whitfield. I am 38 years old. The envelope was plain white. No name on the front, just my dad's handwriting. Small, slanted, the way he always wrote when he didn't want anyone else to read it first. My sister, Renee, snatched it out of my hand before I could open it. "That's not yours," she said. I looked at her. Then at Marcus, my brother, standing behind her with his arms crossed like a bouncer at a club he owned. Then at the room full of people eating casserole and talking in low voices the way people do when someone has just died and no one knows what else to do with their hands. I didn't fight her. I didn't say a word. I just looked at the envelope and memorized exactly what I saw. That was the moment I knew this wasn't going to be simple. My name is Claire. I'm 38 years old. I grew up in a yellow house on Sycamore Ridge Road in Harlan, Georgia. Population 6,000, two churches per block, and the kind of place where everyone knows your business before you do. I'm the youngest of three. Renee is 44, Marcus is 41. And for as long as I can remember, I've been the difficult one. Not because I was mean, not because I caused drama. I was difficult because I asked questions. Why does Renee get to make decisions without telling us? Why did the joint account get closed without a family meeting? Why does Marcus always know things first? Those questions made me difficult, made me a problem, made me the one people rolled their eyes at during holidays and whispered about afterward. I left Harlan at 22, moved to Savannah, married a decent man named Derek, worked my way up from receptionist to office manager at a civil engineering firm. We have a daughter, Lily, who is 9 and has my dad's eyes, brown with gold in the center, like something warm is always lit behind them. I came back to Harlan twice a year, Christmas and Dad's birthday in June. Every visit felt like walking into a room where the conversation had just stopped. My father, Robert Earl Whitfield, was the reason I kept coming back. He was 69, still sharp, still funny, still the man who taught me to read a bank statement at age 11 because he said no daughter of mine is going to get taken advantage of. He meant it. I just didn't realize how much until the end. Dad's diagnosis came in March, non-small cell lung cancer, stage 3. The oncologist at Franklin County Medical, Dr. Aisha Morrow, was direct with us on a Tuesday morning. She said treatment was possible. She said the window mattered. She said he needed to get his affairs in order regardless of what he decided about chemo. I found out 4 days later. Not from Renee, not from Marcus, from my dad himself, who called me at 7:48 on a Saturday morning and said, "Claire Bear, I need you to know something, and I need you to hear it from me." That's when I understood. They had already decided I wasn't necessary. I drove up the following weekend. The house looked the same from the outside. Yellow paint, white porch, the oak tree in the front yard Dad always said he was going to trim and never did. But inside, things had shifted. There were folders on the kitchen table I didn't recognize. A business card from an attorney's office, Greer and Summers Estate Planning, tucked under the fruit bowl. I asked Dad about it over coffee. He waved his hand. "Renee's been helping me get organized. You know how she is." I did know how she was. That was exactly what worried me. By April, the dynamic had hardened into something I could feel in my chest. Renee had effectively moved in. She wasn't living there. She had a house 20 minutes away. But she was there every morning when I called, every evening when I checked in, always the one who answered when I called the landline. She'd started talking about Dad the way people talk about someone who can't speak for themselves. "He's tired today. He doesn't want visitors. He said he'll call you back." He stopped calling me back. Not because he didn't want to. I figured that out later. But at the time, I told myself he was exhausted, that he was processing, that this was just how it went when someone got sick and you didn't live close enough to show up every day. I told myself a lot of things that spring. Marcus, for his part, was playing a different role. Where Renee was the gatekeeper, Marcus was the deal maker. He'd already started talking to Renee about the house. I heard it in pieces during a call in early May, when I was apparently not supposed to be listening. Something about the assessed value, something about a buyout, something about how Claire always said she never wanted to come back anyway. I let that sit. I stayed quiet. I let them talk. The first time I visited after the diagnosis, really visited, stayed 4 days, slept in my old room. My dad and I had one conversation that I've turned over in my mind every day since. It was a Wednesday night. He was on the back porch watching the yard go dark. I brought him his tea the way he liked it. Too sweet, splash of lemon, and sat down next to him. He said, I wrote everything down, the way I want things. I want you to know that. I said, I know, Dad. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, make sure you know. I didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. But I remembered it. Filed it away in the part of my brain where I keep things that don't make sense until later. 2 days after I drove back to Savannah, Renee called me to discuss the family's plan for managing Dad's care. She used the word family 4 times. She did not ask me a single question. Dad was admitted to the hospital on May 29th. Complications from his second round of treatment? He was there for 11 days. During that time, I called every day, drove up on day 4, was told by Renee at the door of the hospital room that he was resting and didn't need the extra stimulation. I stood in that hallway for a long time. Then I drove to a UPS store and bought a small digital recorder. Not for any reason I could fully name yet, just because my father had told me to make sure I knew. And I was starting to think that knowing was going to require something more than asking. I wasn't panicking. I wasn't passive. I was starting to pay attention. He was discharged on June 9th. His 70th birthday was June 14th. I came back for that, same as always. Renee had organized a small party. 12 people in the backyard, paper plates, the yellow cake with chocolate frosting he always requested. It looked warm and normal. My dad smiled the whole time. But at one point, when Renee was in the kitchen and Marcus was talking to the neighbors, Dad reached over and put his hand on my arm. He didn't say anything. He just held on. I looked at his hand, thinner than it used to be. I looked at his face, and I saw it. That look. The one that's not fear exactly. The one that means there's something I can't say in this room. I squeezed his hand back. That was the last birthday I had with him. He passed away on August 3rd at 6:22 in the morning. I got the call from Renee at 7:45. She had been there. Marcus had been there. I had not. The funeral was August 7th. And that brings me back to the beginning. To the plain white envelope. To Renee's hand closing around it before I could read a single word. She locked it in the glove compartment of her car that night. She thought that was the end of it. She had no idea I'd already found what mattered. The week after the funeral, the house on Sycamore Ridge Road stopped feeling like my father's house. It happened fast. Faster than grief, faster than paperwork, faster than anything that's supposed to take time actually took. By August 10th, 3 days after we buried him, Renee had changed the locks. She texted me about it. Had to update the security situation on the house. Let me know if you need to get anything from inside, and we'll arrange a time. Arrange a time. Like I needed an appointment to walk through the door of the house I grew up in. Like I was a contractor, like I was nobody. I read that text 3 times. Then I put my phone face down on my kitchen counter in Savannah, poured myself a glass of water, and stood at the window for a while. I didn't respond right away. I had learned by then that my first response was never the right one. Not with Renee, she fed on reaction. She cataloged your emotions and used them later in conversations you weren't in with people who only got her version. So I waited. And while I waited, I started making a list. I want to be clear about something. I didn't go looking for a fight. What I went looking for was the truth about my father's wishes. Because the man who taught me to read a bank statement, who told me to make sure I knew, who held my arm at his birthday party with that look on his face, that man did not forget about his youngest daughter. He did not cut me out. Someone had done that for him. I just needed to prove it. My list started small. Things I'd noticed, things I'd heard, things that hadn't added up. The business card from Greer and Summers, estate planning attorneys, that appeared in March. The same week Renee started acting like project manager of our father's life. The folders on the kitchen table I hadn't been allowed to look at. The way Dad said I wrote everything down and then said it again, differently. Make sure you know. The 11 days in the hospital when I was kept at arm's length. The birthday party. His hand on my arm. The plain white envelope with his handwriting that Renee grabbed before I could open it. I wrote all of it down in a notes app on my phone, time-stamped, with every detail I could remember. Then I transferred it to a Google Doc I shared with no one, stored under a decoy folder titled Lily School 2024. I wasn't panicking. I was building. On August 12th, I called my father's oldest friend, Harold Gaines. Everyone called him Grandpa Harold, even people who weren't related to him. He was 77, lived alone since his wife passed, and had known my dad since they were 19 years old, working the same summer job at a paper mill outside Augusta. Harold picked up on the second ring. "Claire Bear," he said, "just like my dad used to." I had to press my hand flat against the wall for a second. I asked him how he was doing. We talked about the funeral, about Dad, about the way the backyard looked that last birthday. Then I asked as carefully as I could whether Dad had ever talked to him about the house, about his plans, about what he wanted. Harold was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your daddy talked to me about a lot of things this summer, Claire. I think we should probably meet in person." I drove to Harlan the next morning. Harold lives in a brick house on Clement Street, 12 minutes from Sycamore Ridge. He had coffee ready when I got there. Real coffee, percolated, in a pot that looked older than I was. We sat at his kitchen table and he told me what he knew. In late June, after Dad's birthday, after the hospital stay, after Renee had taken over the house like she'd always owned it, my father had come to Harold's house on a Tuesday afternoon. Alone. Drove himself, which was not easy for him at that point. He brought a document with him. Harold described it as a handwritten letter, several pages with typed attachments. My father had asked Harold to read it, sign as a witness to one section, and hold on to a copy. I went completely still. "Do you still have it?" I asked. Harold got up without a word, went into the back room, came back with a manila envelope, sealed with a piece of masking tape, my father's initials written across the seal in blue pen, a R-E-W. I looked at it for a long time before I touched it. I didn't open it there. Harold said Dad had told him specifically, "Give it to Claire when the time is right, and make sure she's not alone when she reads it." I understood that, so I took it home. I called my husband Derek and asked him to sit with me. We put Lily to bed, sat down at the dining room table at 9:14 p.m., and I opened it. Inside was a 2-page handwritten letter from my father, and behind it, a 4-page typed document. The typed document was a will, dated June 22nd, signed by my father and witnessed by Harold Gaines. 19 days after the hospital discharge. 19 days during which, according to Renee's own text to me, Dad was doing much better and getting back to himself. He had been himself. That was exactly the point. I read that will twice. Then I sat back and looked at the ceiling. The house on Sycamore Ridge Road, the savings account at First Heritage Bank, the 1967 Ford pickup he'd kept in the garage under a tarp, a collection of first edition books he'd been adding to since the 70s. All of it, left to me. With one line that I have memorized word for word. "I leave these things to my daughter Claire because she is the only one who ever asked the right questions, and because I know she will take care of what matters." I cried for about 10 minutes. Then I stopped. Because behind the June 22nd will was something else. A document I hadn't expected. A copy of a different will, dated May 31st. 2 days after my father was admitted to the hospital. Signed during those 11 days when Renee told me he was resting and didn't need extra stimulation. That will left the house to Renee and Marcus jointly, split evenly. It left me a single item. The first edition book collection, valued at the time of the filing at approximately $4,200. The attorney on record was Greer and Summers. The notarization timestamp was 2:17 p.m. on May 31st. I looked that up later. On May 31st at 2:17 p.m., my father had been in the hospital for 2 days. He was on a combination of hydromorphone and lorazepam for pain and anxiety management. I know this because I had called the nursing station myself that afternoon, and a nurse named Patricia had told me he was resting comfortably and managing well with the medication protocol. Hydromorphone, lorazepam. And in that window, someone had brought an attorney to his bedside. I put both documents back in the envelope. I looked at Derek. He said, "We need a lawyer." I said, "I know." I said, "But not just any lawyer." I had done some research before the meeting with Harold. Just background reading. The kind you do when your stomach tells you something is coming and you want to be prepared. I had searched estate fraud attorneys Georgia and Will, contestation undue influence. And I had written down three names. The one that came up twice in two separate case reviews on a legal blog out of Atlanta was a woman named Patricia Osei Bonsu, 46 years old, based in Macon, specializing in estate litigation and elder financial abuse. A quote from one of the articles said, Ms. Osei Bonsu has a reputation for taking cases other firms consider unwinnable and treating the process like a math problem with exactly one correct answer. That was the kind of attorney I needed. I called her office at 8:03 a.m. on August 14th, got her paralegal, a man named Troy, who sounded like he had heard everything and was unimpressed by all of it. I gave him the brief version. When he came back, he said, 30-second Miss Osei Bonsu has a slot Thursday at 11. Can you be in Macon? I said yes before he finished the sentence. While I waited for Thursday, I kept building. I pulled every text message between me and Renee going back 14 months and screenshotted all of them. The one about the locks. The one where she said Dad didn't want visitors. The one from March where she told me the family had already discussed his care plan and would loop me in as needed. I screenshotted the dates, the timestamps, the read receipts. I pulled my phone records and noted every call I'd made to the hospital during those 11 days. I requested, through the hospital's patient records portal, a copy of my father's medication log, which I was entitled to as next of kin, something Renee apparently hadn't thought to block. The records arrived digitally on August 15th. May 31st, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Hydromorphone, 2 milligrams IV administered at 1:48 p.m. Lorazepam, 0.5 milligrams IV administered at 2:06 p.m. Notarization timestamp on Greer and Summers' will, 2:17 p.m. 11 minutes after a sedative entered my father's bloodstream, my stomach dropped so hard I had to sit down. This wasn't careless. This was calculated. Someone had timed it. I walked into Patricia Osei Bonsu's office on Thursday morning with a 2-inch binder, tabbed and indexed. Derek came with me. I wore my good blazer, the navy one I keep for depositions and difficult conversations. Patricia was tall, unhurried, and had the kind of eyes that made you feel like she was already 3 steps ahead of wherever the conversation was going. She read through my binder in silence for 11 minutes. I counted. Then she looked up and said, "This is a strong case. The medication record alone is significant. But I want to know everything, not just what you have. What don't you have yet?" That was the moment I knew I had the right person. I told her about the envelope Renee had grabbed at the funeral reception. The plain white one in my father's handwriting. Patricia picked up her pen. "That envelope," she said, "is now evidence, which means if it disappears, that's a problem for your sister." She pulled a legal pad toward her and started writing. "Here's what we're going to do," she said. I drove back to Savannah with a retainer agreement signed and a plan I hadn't had 48 hours before. Renee thought the locks had ended it. She thought the envelope was hers to keep. She thought being present at the end meant she had already won. But my father had been to Harold's house on a Tuesday in June. He had driven himself, which was not easy, because some things are important enough that you find the strength. He had made sure I would know, and now I did. There's a specific kind of quiet that comes after you understand the full shape of something terrible. Not shock, not rage, something colder than both. I had it for about 3 days after meeting with Patricia. I went to work. I made Lily's lunch. I answered emails. I folded laundry at 10 p.m. and watched Derek watch me from across the room with that look he gets when he knows better than to say anything. On the outside, I was fine. On the inside, I was cataloging every single thing I knew about my sister and what she had done to our dying father in a hospital room at 2:17 in the afternoon. Patricia had given me a list. Specific things to gather, specific things to avoid. The first rule was, do not contact Renee or Marcus about the estate. Not yet. Not a word. Any conversation now was a card shown too early. She would handle all communication through formal channels when the time came. The second rule, document everything that moves. I took that seriously. I had already screenshotted the texts, already pulled the medication logs, already had the June 22nd Will and Harold's witness signature in a fireproof box under my bed. But Patricia wanted more. She wanted the full financial picture: any accounts my father held, any transfers made in the months before his death, any indication that assets had already started moving before the will was even read. That sent me back to something Dad had said to me years ago when I was maybe 20 and had just opened my first real checking account. Claire, always know where the money is, not approximately, exactly. I started there. My father was not a complicated financial man. He had a checking account and a savings account at First Heritage Bank in Harlan, the same bank he'd used since 1987. He had a small brokerage account through Edward Jones that he'd opened in the 90s and mostly left alone. He had the house, which was paid off, assessed at $214,000 by Franklin County in 2023. He had his truck and his books and a whole life insurance policy worth $75,000 through a company called Beacon Mutual. I knew about most of this because Dad had told me, not in one conversation, in pieces, over years, the way he told me things. A detail here, a number there. The savings has about 40 in it right now, Claire Bear. Nothing fancy, but it's clean. What I didn't know was what had happened to any of it in the last 6 months. Patricia filed a formal discovery request. But while that worked through channels, I did what I could on my own. I called First Heritage Bank on August 19th and identified myself as Robert Whitfield's daughter. I asked to speak to someone about his accounts given his recent passing. The woman who took my call, her name tag, she told me, was Beverly, was kind and careful. She said she couldn't share account details without proper documentation, but she could confirm whether an estate inquiry had already been opened. She put me on hold for 90 seconds. When she came back, her voice had shifted, just slightly. Careful in a different way. She said, "Ms. Whitfield, I can see that an inquiry was opened on this account on August 8th. August 8th, one day after the funeral. I thanked Beverly and hung up. Then I sat in my car in the parking lot of the engineering firm where I work, and I breathed very slowly for about 2 minutes. One day after we put him in the ground, Dury. Patricia moved fast once I told her. She filed for a temporary restraining order on the estate assets on August 21st, citing potential dissipation pending will contest proceedings. Judge Alma Cofield of Franklin County Probate Court granted it the same afternoon. I found out via a text from Patricia at 4:47 p.m. that just said, "Granted, assets frozen. Renee will be served tomorrow morning." I imagined Renee's face when the server knocked on her door. I let myself have that for about 30 seconds, then I moved on. The will contest was filed under NRE, estate of Robert Earl Whitfield, Franklin County Probate Court, case number 2, 024-PR-1847. The grounds were twofold: undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity at the time of signing. The testamentary capacity argument was the sharper blade, because testamentary capacity means the person signing understood what they were signing, who their family was, and what their assets were. And the medication log from 2:17 p.m. on May 31st made a very compelling argument that Robert Earl Whitfield, 2 days into a hospital stay, 11 minutes after receiving intravenous hydromorphone and lorazepam, did not have that capacity. Patricia said it plainly when she filed. This document was executed in a window that any competent medical expert will describe as inappropriate for legal decision-making. We will demonstrate that those present at the signing knew that, those present at the signing. She wasn't just going after the document. She was going after the people who brought the attorney to that room. 2 things happened in the last week of August that I hadn't expected. The first was a phone call from Marcus. He called me on August 23rd at 9:02 a.m. I let it go to voicemail. His message was 47 seconds long and managed to be both conciliatory and threatening in a way that I'm sure he thought was balanced. He said he understood I was grieving. He said the family was grieving too. He said Renee had only been trying to protect Dad's wishes, and that things had gotten complicated, and that he thought it would be worth sitting down to talk before this went any further. Then, at the end, almost as an aside, he said, "I just don't want to see you spend money on lawyers fighting something that's already settled, Claire, for Lily's sake." Lily's sake. I sent that voicemail directly to Patricia. She called me back in 20 minutes. I could hear her almost smiling through the phone. He just implied you should drop a legal challenge for the sake of your child. She said, I'm going to enjoy this. The second thing was the security camera. My father had installed a small doorbell camera in 2022, one of those basic models, a blink, that stores footage in the cloud. He'd set it up after a package got stolen off his porch. I had helped him do it over a Thanksgiving visit, set up the app on his phone, showed him how to check the clips. It had never occurred to me that the footage might still be there. It occurred to Patricia. She had her tech consultant, a quiet, meticulous man named Andre Webb, pull the account credentials from the email address Dad had used to register the device. The email was still active. The cloud storage had 60 days of rolling footage. 60 days back from August 3rd took us to early June. Andre pulled everything and sent Patricia a folder of time-stamped clips. I was at work when she called me. I stepped into the hallway. She said, I need you to look at something when you get home tonight. Don't react until you've watched it twice. I watched it at 8:30 p.m. Derek sat next to me. Lily was asleep. The clip was from July 9th, 11:22 a.m. A car pulled up to my father's house, a silver Honda Accord. A man got out, heavy-set, dark blazer, carrying a leather portfolio. He rang the doorbell, my father answered. They shook hands. The man went inside. He was inside for 1 hour and 14 minutes. When he left, he was carrying the portfolio and a manila envelope that had not been in his hands when he arrived. I paused the clip, zoomed in on the license plate, Georgia plate. I wrote it down. Patricia had already run it. The Accord was registered to a man named Daniel Greer, of Greer and Summers, the same attorney who had notarized the May 31st will back at my father's house on July 9th. 5 weeks before Dad died, long after the hospital visit, long after the first will had supposedly been signed and settled. So what did he come back for? Andre dug further into the cloud footage. He found 2 more visits. June 28th, July 9th, July 24th. 3 visits from Daniel Greer to my father's home in the final 6 weeks of his life. None of which Renee had mentioned. None of which appeared in any documentation we had been provided. I stared at those 3 dates for a long time. Then something clicked. I went back to my father's handwritten letter, the one from the June 22nd will Harold had kept. I had read it so many times I almost had it memorized. But I read it again now, looking for something specific. Halfway through the second page, I found it. I've asked Mr. Greer to return on July 9th to review the revised trust arrangement. Renee does not know I have spoken with him privately. I want this handled correctly before it is too late. My father had contacted Greer himself. Not Renee. Not Marcus. Dad. He had called the attorney his children had brought to him and had begun his own separate conversation. He had worked quietly in the weeks he had left to undo what had been done to him. And Renee had no idea. I called Patricia at 9:47 p.m. I know it was late. She answered anyway. I read her the line from the letter. She was quiet for 4 seconds. Then she said, Claire, your father was a very smart man. I had to press my hand against the wall again. What does this mean for the case? I asked. It means Greer was working both sides, she said, which means he either has documents we haven't seen yet, or he destroyed them, or he's sitting on something that is going to make his bar license very uncomfortable. She paused. Either way, we're deposing him. The deposition of Daniel Greer, Esquire, was scheduled for September 11th. In the 2 weeks between that call and that date, 3 more things surfaced. First, Patricia's financial forensics contact found a wire transfer from my father's First Heritage savings account. August 1st, 2 days before he died. $11,000 transferred to an account in Renee's name at SunTrust. $11,000? 2 days before he died. Second, Marcus had already contacted a real estate agent. I found this because the agent, a woman named Diane Purvis at Harlan Realty Group, had posted the property on an internal MLS preview listing on August 18th. Not public, but visible to anyone with agent access. Patricia's colleague had agent access. 4 Sycamore Ridge Road, Harlan, GA, estate sale pending. 3BR/2BA. Estimated list, $229,000. They had listed my father's house 15 days after his funeral. Third, and this one, I found myself at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, going through an old box of Dad's papers I had taken from the house years ago after a visit. At the bottom of the box, underneath his discharge papers from the Army and a photo of him at 23, was a folded piece of notebook paper. His handwriting, undated. But the ink in the paper told me it was old. Years old, maybe a decade. 6 lines. If something happens to me and my affairs are not in order, find Harold. He knows. Claire will understand what to do. She always asks the right questions. Don't let them tell her she's being difficult. That just means she's close to the truth. I sat with that piece of paper on the floor of my hallway for a long time. He had known, not recently. For years, he had known how this might go, and he had planted that note like a seed, in a box he knew I would keep. For a moment he hoped would never come. My father had trusted me before I even knew I needed to be trusted. I went into the deposition of Daniel Greer with Patricia and a binder that was now 4 inches thick. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. The deposition took place on a Thursday morning in a conference room on the 4th floor of a building in Macon that smelled like carpet cleaner and old coffee. Daniel Greer arrived 7 minutes late. He was exactly what the camera footage had suggested. Heavy-set, dark blazer, the kind of man who had spent enough years in rooms like this that he no longer felt the need to hurry. He had his own attorney with him, a man named Cliff Beaumont, silver-haired, tan, the kind of lawyer who golfs with judges and wants you to know it. Greer sat down, adjusted his portfolio, and looked across the table at Patricia with the expression of someone who expected this to be manageable. Patricia smiled at him. I had seen that smile once before, in our first meeting. It meant she was already done. I want to explain something about Patricia Osibonsu before I tell you what happened in that room. She does not perform. She does not raise her voice. She does not do the thing lawyers do in movies where they pace and point and deliver speeches. What she does is build a box. Question by question, answer by answer, she constructs 4 walls around a witness. And then she closes the lid. Quietly, completely. And by the time the witness realizes they are inside it, there is no door. She had been building Daniel Greer's box for 3 weeks. The first hour was procedural. Dates, timelines, how long he'd been in practice, how he came to represent my father's estate. Greer was smooth, confident. He had clearly been prepped well by Beaumont. He confirmed the May 31st will. He confirmed the hospital visit. He said my father had been lucid and clear at the time of signing. He said there had been no concerns about capacity. Patricia nodded along pleasantly. Then she slid a document across the table. Mr. Greer, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 14. This is the medication administration record from Franklin County Medical Center for Robert Whitfield on May 31st. Can you confirm you see the 1:48 p.m. entry and the 2:06 p.m. entry? Greer looked at it. Something moved behind his eyes. Just briefly. I see it. And can you tell me what time the will was signed and notarized? A pause. 2:17 p.m. So 11 minutes after Mr. Whitfield received intravenous lorazepam. Beaumont said, objection. Calls for medical expertise. Patricia said, I'm not asking for a medical opinion, Cliff. I'm asking him to confirm that the timestamp on the document he notarized is 11 minutes after the timestamp on this medication record. That's arithmetic. Greer confirmed it. Patricia moved on without a word. That was her style. She didn't celebrate, she just kept building. The second hour is where the box started closing. She pulled up the doorbell footage. 3 visits. June 28th, July 9th, July 24th. She asked Greer to confirm he was the man in the footage. He confirmed it. She asked who had requested those visits. He said Renee Whitfield. Patricia tilted her head just slightly. Renee Whitfield requested all 3 of those visits? That's correct. Not Robert Whitfield? A half-second pause. She was coordinating on his behalf. Patricia slid another document across the table. It was a printout of 3 emails. From my father's personal email account, which Patricia had subpoenaed records for, sent in late June and early July, each one addressed directly to Daniel Greer at his firm address. I had not known about these emails until Patricia showed them to me the night before. Dad had been writing to Greer himself, asking to meet privately, asking about revising the arrangement, asking in one email dated July 3rd whether it was possible to undo something that was signed when I was not myself. When I was not myself. My father had known. He had known what had been done to him in that hospital room. Greer read the emails. His jaw tightened. "Did you receive these emails, Mr. Greer?" Patricia asked. "Yes." "Did you respond?" I. There were conversations. "Yes." "And did you inform Renee Whitfield that her father was attempting to contact you independently to revise his estate documents?" The longest pause yet. Beaumont said, "I'm going to advise my client." Patricia said, "Your client is under oath, Cliff." Greer looked at his hands. "I may have mentioned it, yes." The room went very quiet. I stayed still. I had promised myself I would stay still no matter what happened in that room. Derek had offered to come. I said no. I needed to be the only Whitfield at that table. But when Greer said I may have mentioned it, my hands went flat on my thighs under the table and I pressed down hard. He had told her. Dad had reached out privately, trying to undo what they had done to him, and Greer had gone straight to Renee, which explained July 24th. The third visit, the last one on the camera footage, 10 days before Dad died. What had happened in my father's house that afternoon? Patricia was already there. "Mr. Greer, during the July 24th visit, which you've confirmed was requested by Renee Whitfield, what documents, if any, were discussed or executed?" Beaumont started to object. Patricia talked through it. What was the purpose of the July 24th visit? Greer exhaled slowly. "There was a codicil," he said. "A modification to the May will." Patricia did not blink. "What did the codicil address?" "It removed the book collection from the estate as a line item." I felt something go cold in my chest. The book collection. The only thing the May will had left me. They had come back on July 24th and taken that too. Patricia called a 10-minute recess. In the hallway, she put her hand on my arm and looked at me directly. "Are you okay?" I said yes. I meant it mostly. She said, "What just happened in there is significant. He's confirmed the codicil. He's confirmed he told Renee about your father's private communications. He is, whether he knows it yet, describing a coordinated effort to override your father's expressed wishes. That's not just will fraud, Claire. That's elder financial abuse under Georgia Code 30-5-3. That changes the exposure for everyone in this." I asked what that meant practically. She said, "It means Renee and Marcus aren't just looking at losing a civil case. They're looking at a referral to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation." We went back in. Patricia spent the final 40 minutes of the deposition walking Greer through the June 22nd will, the one Harold had witnessed, the one that left everything to me. Greer had not known it existed. I watched him understand in real time that he had been used by Renee and Marcus as a tool in a plan they hadn't fully explained to him. He had notarized a will at 2:17 p.m. with a sedated man's signature. He had relayed private communications back to the family. He had executed a codicil that stripped the last remaining asset from a daughter the family wanted erased. And all of that had happened while a separate, valid, witnessed will was sitting in a manila envelope in Harold Gaines's back room on Clement Street. Every document Greer had touched was now potentially worthless. And every action he had taken was now potentially criminal. Beaumont requested a break at the 90-minute mark and did not come back for 22 minutes. When they returned, Beaumont said, "My client would like to discuss the possibility of a cooperation agreement." Patricia looked at him pleasantly. "I'm sure he would," and she said, "Tell him to call the GBI first, then we'll talk." The formal hearing before Judge Cofield was scheduled for October 14th. In the 5 weeks between the deposition and the hearing, the case expanded in ways I hadn't anticipated and Renee definitely hadn't planned for. Greer's cooperation opened a channel. He provided emails, internal notes from his firm, and a billing record that showed Renee had been his primary contact on the estate file from the very first meeting in March. Before Dad had even agreed to use Greer and Summers at all, she had hired the attorney. She had paid the initial retainer from her own account. She had directed the engagement. Dad had never chosen Greer. Renee had chosen Greer for him and presented it as a fait accompli during a moment when he was sick and tired and just trying to get through his days. Patricia filed the GBI referral on September 23rd. I found out through a news alert, not because anyone told me, but because a local reporter named James Okafor at the Harlan Courier had somehow gotten wind of the referral and published a 3-paragraph item on the paper's website under the headline, Franklin County Estate Case, referred to GBI amid elder abuse allegations. My phone started buzzing within the hour. People from Harlan I hadn't heard from in years, friends of Dad's, neighbors, a woman who had gone to church with him for 30 years who called me crying and said she had always known something wasn't right. Renee called me that same afternoon for the first time since the funeral. I didn't answer. I sent the call log to Patricia, October 3rd, 11 days before the hearing. Marcus called Derek. Not me, Derek. At 7:15 in the evening while I was putting Lily to bed. Derek came and found me when I came downstairs. He had a look on his face that was somewhere between disgusted and almost impressed. He said, Marcus wants to settle. He says Renee is willing to sign the house over, drop the May will, and split the savings account 50-50. He said to tell you, and I'm quoting directly, this doesn't have to go any further, and Claire should think about what a public hearing does to the family name. I looked at Derek for a moment. Then I said, call Patricia. Derek smiled. Already texted her. Patricia called back in 8 minutes. I told her what Marcus had said. She said, no. Just that? No, I said. I assumed. But walk me through it. She said, a settlement now means no public record, no findings, no accountability. They sign over a house and walk away from elder abuse and fraud with a handshake and a non-disclosure. Your father reached out to his own attorney trying to undo what they did to him. He drove himself to Harold's house when he was sick because he needed someone to witness what he wanted. He wrote you a letter. He left you a note in a box years ago. He did all of that so the truth would survive him. A settlement buries it. She paused. We go to the hearing. October 14th. I wore the navy blazer again. Derek drove. Lily stayed with a neighbor. The courthouse in Harlan is a brick building on Main Street that has been there since 1923. I had walked past it my whole childhood without ever going inside. My father had pointed it out to me once when I was little and said, that's where things get settled when people can't settle them themselves. I thought about that as we walked up the steps. The courtroom was smaller than I expected and more crowded than I expected. The Harlan Courier reporter was there. Harold Gaines was there in a gray suit sitting in the second row. He nodded at me when I walked in. Renee and Marcus were already seated at the respondents' table. Renee had a different attorney, not Beaumont, someone new, a woman named Trisha Park who I didn't know. Marcus sat very still and did not look at me. Renee looked at me once when I took my seat. I looked back. I didn't look away first. Judge Cofield entered at 9:17 a.m. She was 61, compact, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck that she used constantly and efficiently. She had been on the Franklin County bench for 19 years. Patricia had told me, she does not tolerate theater, she tolerates evidence. Give her evidence and she will follow it wherever it goes. Patricia had given her a great deal of evidence. The hearing lasted 4 hours and 12 minutes. I will not walk you through every moment, but I will tell you the 3 that I go back to. The first was when Patricia presented the medication log. She had a medical expert, Dr. Raymond Cho, a pharmacologist from Emory, testify by video to the sedative effects of the specific drug combination administered at 1:48 and 2:06 p.m. He was precise, clinical, and damning. He said a patient in that state would have significant impairment of executive function and decision-making capacity. He said signing a legal document in that window would be inadvisable at best, exploitative at worst. Judge Cofield asked him one question. In your professional opinion, would a competent attorney present in that room have known this? Dr. Cho said, yes, any attorney with elder law experience would have known. Trisha Park objected. The judge overruled her without looking up. The second moment was Harold. He took the stand and testified to witnessing the June 22nd will. He described my father driving to his house. He described his condition, tired but clear himself, the way he always was when something mattered to him. He described the conversation they had. He described my father saying, "I need this done right, Harold, and I need someone I trust to hold it." Then Patricia asked Harold one final question. In your 49 years of friendship with Robert Whitfield, was he a man who knew his own mind? Harold looked out at the courtroom for a moment. Robert, he said, was the most clear headed man I ever knew, and the most careful. He didn't do anything by accident, not ever. In the second row, I saw a woman from Dad's church press a tissue to her face. I pressed my feet flat on the floor and breathed. The third moment was the one nobody planned. During a brief recess, Lily called my cell phone. I had told her I would be in an important meeting and not to call unless necessary. So when her name came up on my screen, I stepped into the hallway and answered. She said, "Mom, I just wanted to say good luck and that Grandpa would be really proud of you." I stood in that hallway for a moment, couldn't speak. Then I said, "I know, baby. I know he would." I went back into the courtroom and sat down, and I was ready for whatever came next. Judge Cofield delivered her ruling at 3:41 p.m. She did not take it under advisement. She did not schedule a follow-up date. She read from a 4-page written decision she had apparently been drafting through the lunch recess, which told me she had made up her mind before we came back from the break. She just needed the afternoon session to finish the record. I sat very still. Patricia sat next to me with her pen resting on her legal pad, not writing anything. That was how I knew. The ruling was this. The May 31st will was invalidated, in full. Judge Cofield found that the circumstances of execution, the timing, the medication record, the lack of any independent capacity assessment, the presence of an attorney retained and directed by a beneficiary constituted a failure of testamentary capacity and evidence of undue influence sufficient to void the document entirely. She used the phrase procedurally and ethically compromised twice. The July 24th codicil was invalidated alongside it. The June 22nd will, witnessed by Harold Gaines, executed 19 days after hospital discharge, reflecting my father's expressed and documented wishes, was admitted to probate as the valid controlling document. The house on Sycamore Ridge Road was mine. The First Heritage Savings Account, minus the $11,000 that had been wired to Renee 2 days before Dad died, which was now subject to a separate civil recovery action, was mine. The truck, the books, the Edward Jones account, mine. There was a sound in the courtroom when the judge finished reading. Not dramatic, not like the movies, just a shift, a collective exhale. Harold made a small sound that I think was the beginning of something he stopped himself from finishing. The reporter's pen was moving fast. Marcus stared at the table. Renee did not move for a long moment. Then she turned and said something quietly to Tricia Park. I couldn't hear it. I didn't need to. Judge Cofield removed her glasses and looked out at the room. I want to add something not contained in the written ruling, she said. The room went quiet again. This court has seen a number of estate disputes over the years. What distinguishes this case is not the complexity of the legal questions. It is the clarity of the decedent's intent. Robert Whitfield took deliberate steps, under difficult circumstances, to ensure his wishes were recorded and preserved. He drove himself to a friend's home when he was ill. He wrote letters. He reached out to his own attorney. He left documentation across years. That kind of sustained, careful effort deserves to be honored. This court honors it today. She put her glasses back on and closed the folder. We're adjourned. Outside, on the courthouse steps, Harold put his arms around me and held on for a long time. He smelled like the same aftershave he'd worn my entire life. Something cedar and clean. I let myself stay there for a moment. Then I stood back and looked at him. I said, "He knew you'd keep it safe." Harold nodded. His eyes were wet. He said, "He knew you'd know what to do with it." Derek squeezed my hand. I squeezed back. We walked down the steps and into the October afternoon, and I breathed the air in Harlan, Georgia for the first time in months without something pressing on my chest. The civil recovery action for the $11,000 wire transfer was filed the following week. Renee settled it within 30 days, writing a check rather than face a second hearing. Patricia called it the fastest check she had ever seen Renee Whitfield write. I told Patricia she could donate her percentage of the recovery to whatever she wanted. She donated it to a legal aid organization in Macon that handles elder abuse cases. I thought Dad would have liked that. The GBI investigation moved on its own timeline, separate from everything I controlled. What I know is this: Daniel Greer surrendered his notary commission in November and entered into a consent agreement with the Georgia State Bar that placed him on supervised probation for 3 years and required 40 hours of elder law ethics training. His cooperation with investigators was apparently extensive. Greer and Summers dissolved as a firm before the end of the year. What happened with Renee and Marcus and the GBI investigation? I am not going to tell you, not because I don't know, but because Patricia advised me that certain parts of an ongoing matter are better left undiscussed publicly. What I will say is that the referral was not closed, and that elder financial abuse in Georgia carries criminal exposure of up to 10 years. I will let you draw your own conclusions. Marcus sent me a text in December. Just one line. I'm sorry, Claire, I know that doesn't mean anything right now. I read it once. I didn't respond. Maybe someday? Not yet. Renee has not contacted me. I don't expect her to. I moved back into the house on Sycamore Ridge Road in November. Not permanently. Derek's job is in Savannah. Lily's school is in Savannah. Our life is in Savannah. But I took 2 weeks and I went back alone and I opened every window and I walked through every room. The house smelled like him still. That particular combination of old books and coffee and the cedar closet in the hallway. I stood in the kitchen doorway for a long time just breathing it in. I fixed the porch. Dad had been meaning to fix it for years. 2 boards on the left side had been soft since a wet spring in 2019. He always said he'd get to it. I bought the lumber at the hardware store on Route 9, where the man behind the counter remembered my father immediately and spent 10 minutes telling me about a conversation they'd had in July. I fixed the boards myself. It took most of an afternoon. When I was done, I sat down on the repaired porch and looked at the oak tree in the front yard, the one Dad always said he was going to trim and never did. I'm not going to trim it either. The letter was the last thing I found. I had been going through the house methodically, not clearing it out, just learning it again, understanding what was there. The bedroom, the hallway closet, the garage where the truck sat under its tarp, which I have decided to learn to drive even though it is a manual transmission and I have no idea what I'm doing. The study was the last room. Dad's study was small. More of a reading nook, really, with a single window facing the backyard and shelves he had built himself in 1994, slightly uneven, which he had always considered a mark of authenticity. The first edition books were there, organized by year, each one in a protective sleeve. I was checking the shelves when I noticed one book slightly out of alignment. East of Eden, Steinbeck, 1952, first edition. Pushed back a half-inch further than the others. I pulled it out. Behind it, in the gap between the book and the wall, was an envelope. Not the plain white one Renee had grabbed at the funeral. This one was cream-colored, slightly thicker, with my name on the front in Dad's handwriting. Just Claire. I sat down on the floor of the study, back against the shelves, and opened it. 4 pages. Handwritten. Dated July 29th. 5 days before he died. I am not going to share all of it. Some of it is mine. Some of it is between a father and his daughter and belongs nowhere else. But there are parts I can tell you. He wrote about the house, about the summer he and my mother had painted it yellow. Her idea, he said, which he had resisted and then immediately loved. About the oak tree, which he had planted as a sapling the year I was born, and which he said he had never trimmed because watching it grow unimpeded was one of the quiet pleasures of his life. He wrote about the books, about how he had started collecting them when he was 27, after a stretch of his life that was hard in ways he had never fully explained to us, because he believed that if he surrounded himself with things that lasted, he might learn to last too. He wrote, "I know what happened this spring. I know what was done. I want you to understand that I did everything I could to make it right. I hope it was enough. I think it was enough. You were always the one who paid attention, Claire Bear. So pay attention to this. I am not angry. I am at peace. Take care of the house. Take care of yourself. Ask the right questions. You always do. And then, at the very bottom of the last page, a single line that I have read every morning since. The difficult ones are usually the ones who are right. I am writing this from the porch of the house on Sycamore Ridge Road. It is early spring now. The oak tree is doing what it does every April, coming back louder than you expected, greener than you remembered. The porch boards are solid under my feet. The street is quiet. Somewhere inside, the coffee is still hot. I spent most of my adult life being told I was the problem, the difficult one, the one who asked too many questions, pushed too hard, couldn't just let things be. It turns out let things be is exactly what they needed me to do. It turns out difficult was just another word for paying attention. My father knew that. He'd known it for years, apparently, tucked inside a box and a wall in a cream-colored envelope behind a Steinbeck first edition. He left me a house. He left me his books. He left me the truth, documented and witnessed and preserved with the same careful patience he had applied to everything in his life that mattered. And he left me that line. The difficult ones are usually the ones who are right. I think about Renee calling me that at every holiday for 20 years. I think about Marcus rolling his eyes. I think about every room I walked into and felt the conversation pause. I think about my father, sick and tired, driving himself to Harold's house because some things are important enough that you find the strength. I'm not angry either. I'm just here, in the house, on the porch he meant to fix, watching the tree he never trimmed, asking the right questions, same as always.